All right, hello everybody. This is the Nephew SIG automation meeting for Wednesday, March 1st. It's 9 a.m.-ish in Pacific time. So today we had two things we wanted to cover. One is we started a discussion last week about trying to break up into smaller teams than this large group so that we can execute a little more independently. So the idea is that there are certain areas that we'd like to be able to make progress on R1 towards. And so we're hoping to break into those smaller teams around what people, one, what the deliverables are, two, what people are interested in contributing to. And so assuming that doesn't take the whole hour, we'll also spend some time and finish up the document Aravind started walking through last week. So that said, let me show the document. This is the document I sent out last week, and it's gotten a fair bit of comments. The idea here is, I think I put it in one of these comments, how do we divide up the larger team? We know we have, based on our survey, we have roughly 8 full-time equivalent people.
It's a bit more in the meantime, John. In the meantime, it's a bit more, but okay, yeah.
Good.
But in the meantime, it's like 35 people and something like that. So it's growing still. So
yeah, that's good. But it's spread out among many people. And as we all know,
yes,
there's context switching costs and there's overhead, and so spread out across that many people, we're probably not going to really get that much out of everybody, but like we should be able to get a lot done over the next few months. So that said, how do we make the most effective use of those people? These larger meetings early on make a lot of sense, but as we break down into smaller teams, we're going to be more executing on tasks and issues and triaging bugs and things like that that we don't all need to do together all the time. So along those lines, back to the one I was sharing, really we need to do this across SIG automation and SIG release, which this document covers, but really I want to talk about SIG automation here. So let me see if I can make it. These are the basic areas of work that I see, and others have added some things. Like somebody added, I don't know who, but thank you, added like security or really AAA, like authentication, authorization, accounting is usually how that is, but really it's about authorization largely. Authentication is handled by Kubernetes at this point, but there's quite a bit of subtlety in making those things work. I also added this since I originally created the document that I had, because of my own biases, just left out and forgotten about, but it's super important for a lot of people, is what the user interface is. And it's super important to make it usable. So those were the sort of broad areas that we came up with. I'd like to, and modeling has been suggested, this isn't its own area for R1. It is maybe in the future, but for R1, it's just move it into some of the other groups. And then I think Wim suggested splitting hydration into two parts as well. So that's all great, but it's too many in my mind. Like, yeah. I think 6 maximum in my mind, but I'd love to hear from other folks.
So 6, you mean 3 on SIG release and 3 on SIG automation, I think, right, John?
Yeah, because they were largely the same people.
Yeah.
Like,
yes, I agree. I was just clarifying the 6 is across. So I think we were looking at 3 for automation and 3 for release, right? Yeah.
Right. So one way to do that is, like, one way would be from a SIG automation perspective, you could say workload cluster is almost its own thing, right? So that includes the network management on the workload cluster. It includes the network function operators on the workload cluster. It includes the well, bootstrapping of config sync is already sort of considered part of our setup right now. That would go into infrastructure setup, which isn't in R1 scope. So, so really, it would include primarily those those two pieces. That seems to be a pretty natural divide. Another one is, I mean, we could also just say management cluster, but I think Wim, you were suggesting that we probably should split it out into like
I know. I'll see if we add to UI. So I was thinking really pre-hydration, hydration, and then workload. That's what I was thinking. And you could potentially add UI into the pre-hydration because that's how the system will be consumed. I think like security and AAA is important, but I think we have to probably. I see the following, right? Is we first have to start getting the implementations going for R1, right? So that's why I was more thinking on that type of approach to say, okay, let's certain people focus on the pre-hydration, some teams focus on the hydration, and other teams focus on the workload cluster. So at least we have that thing going, because then at least we can say, okay, all these issues that we have on our GitHub, this is team A, this is team B, this is team C, right? And then they are the owner, and then how they divide that, it's up to the team to make that happen. And at least we have the whole thing going. Now, there will be various tasks that probably we are not covered, but at least, sorry, we start, and it's probably not complete, but we probably will optimize as we go along. Yeah, and then I would think that each of the CRDs is owned. So, okay, we have a framework of the CRDs. We have to put it together. But for example, there is UPF deployment, SMF deployment, AMF deployment, which will be owned. Who owns it? The workload cluster has to consume it. So I'm assuming that they are the typical owners, right? And then the
for those, I actually, for people who want you to do those, I asked them to model that as well. So An and Rashid and Rush and then the folks from Capgemini. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So we put say, okay, these CRDs are with you. So we basically put it in a team. They get responsible for it. These CRDs belong here. These CRDs belong there, and they detail them out, and then they implement the controllers, and then. If we can get that started, I think that's already a very good progress in my view. And then there's, as you said, there is many things probably forgotten, but we will sort that out along the way.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense to me. So what we would be saying then is there'd be a workload cluster team. There'd be two management cluster teams. One team would focus on kind of the pre-fan out hydration. So that's the cluster invariant stuff, and the UI pieces, kind of the how you get the ball rolling, and then and I guess the fan out falls into there. And then once it's fanned out, there's a sequence of things that happen in managing the conditions on a package that's and injecting all the workload cluster specific information, the IPAM, what if we do VLAN assignments or whatever we do, all of that falls into that team. Is that would be the suggestion?
Correct, and then correct.
Yeah, thanks, John. I was thinking something similar, but with slight twist. Instead of saying pre-hydration, post-hydration UX, just like the workload cluster, right? Just like we said, there is a free 5GC operator. And then that is one of the main components there, and obviously the network plumbing is the main component there. Similar to that, if you can enumerate what exactly happens on the management cluster, which is a topology controller, there is a watcher, and there is a IPMI injector I think at least those are the three that I know. If
Yeah.
we can enumerate that, according to me, that piece is the biggest chunk of actual work. The what is called as hydration in the document right now. So if you can enumerate that and then probably then do a concurrent divide, that may be helpful, is what I'm thinking.
That's a great point. So in my mind, the pre-fan the pre-fan out piece. So team A, which is like team A, B, and C in the order the order the data flows through the system. Just to make it easy, team A is package variant set and the related kept functions and injectors.
Topology controller. Topology controller.
Controller if we need it, right? This is
Yes, if it's needed. Yeah. That's still a debate, but see, John, in my view, if we do this, that team will sort it out, right? We don't have a discussion anymore. So it's the team will sort out the way they do it. And then, okay, maybe there will be some things that we cannot do, but okay, at least we have a decision and we move forward.
Right, exactly. Yep. And then in topology, okay, and then so that's team A. Team B is IPEM controller, injectors for
NF injectors, yeah, whatever injectors we need. I don't know whether we need still NF injector, depending on that was a discussion I think we need to have to see whether it's still needed or it's already included in the package from the start or not. So there is, that's also, yeah. It's a bunch of injectors.
Cluster specialization pieces, right? Like post, like it's the coordinated aspect of like multiple actors acting on the package and getting it ready for deployment. Eventually, something like a rollout controller could fit into that team too, that decides how to roll out packages across a fleet of clusters. That's not something we're going to do in R1, but it's something that falls into that domain. Then there's the piece that doesn't fall into any, then the workload cluster team. So then there's the piece that doesn't fall into any, well, I guess we could probably put it in the team B, which would be something that takes the status back from the workload cluster on whether a given package has been realized on that workload cluster, flags it in the, somehow records it in the management cluster so that the UI, for example, can present it. And at some point it's got to aggregate up to, because we have this resource that says, you know, here's a package across a topology. It would be nice to aggregate the status of all of those, say, yes, they've all been realized, or, 3 of 7 have been realized, or whatever it is. So that piece probably fits well in team B, because it's sort of like that boundary between the workload cluster and the management cluster. Dish?
Yeah. I mean, for people hearing this conversation, definitely it seems like John and Wim and a couple like Bala and all of this seems to know exactly what is going on, right? So let's say I come in new into this Nefio. I'm only trying to play this right in my head, like, hey, I don't know about Kubernetes. What is it expected? What kind of questions are you anticipating coming from some other folks? Hey, do I need to know, should I already have working knowledge of Kubernetes? There might be people coming up with that kind of a question. I don't think I have actually done Kubernetes.
Yeah.
And if there can be like, they might be like, what should I do before I understand all the things you're saying? Should I go to the workshop VM? And then the second thing is for me, where I felt that I felt behind was like, I didn't go into look and play with KPT and port and all this stuff, which I'm doing recently, right? So things like that. If there can be some sort of guidance for people that can be provided in general, hey, if you're trying to commit an FO for you to be successful, for example, on the SIG release, let's say, there are some things that you can do without having to understand everything that is going on the KPT side of things, package side of things, and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is to set up people to be, I'm sure that is what your idea is, to be successful and to contribute, right? So is that being thought through, or is there anything that we can help to guide people to pick the teams or offer prerequisites, or say, hey, it doesn't matter, don't worry, Wim knows this piece, he can help you guide here, so you can be on this team. So how would you allow? I don't know if I'm the only one having this question.
No, this is an important question that we've been struggling with since day one of launch. Is there's an incredible amount of contextual. We're trying to build on. We're trying to stand on the, as they say, stand on the shoulders of giants, right? And one of those giants is Kubernetes. Like, you know, and it's, that means there's a lot of base knowledge that honestly not a lot of people have, not just in the telco world, but in the world, right? Like there aren't, this is something, yes, people have been building operators for 4 or 5 years, but it's a small set of people that have been building those operators, and maybe a small set of people in each company, right? So it's a huge amount of base knowledge that we're trying to build up. And so we need better onboarding for sure. I think what I think you're asking is, if we divide up into these teams, how does onboarding work onto one of those teams? Like, what's the base knowledge needed for team A, team B, or team C? Or what can somebody contribute who has different expertise? Like there's people with expertise in you know, overlay networking and the details of how, you know, Linux kernel networking works and all of this stuff that's super valuable. How can they contribute, right? Like so I think that that's a good question. I don't have an answer for it right now, other than like I've put together placeholder issues to say, hey, here's some onboarding material that I think would be helpful, but finding the time to and bandwidth to produce it all is pretty challenging.
That's fine. And for example, I know Tal actually has put up something for his, I know even I reached out to, I see Ravi also, right? About like, he became familiar with Kept because I had some questions that I reached out to him, and then Tal is like looking to do something with config sync and poach, which I was also trying to do. You know, there's opportunities wherein when folks come in, I only want them to feel that they're going to learn something and also contribute. And if we are able to pick some of you guys' brains and actually come up with some material for like, hey, if you want to come here, why don't you go familiar with this and come here? Oh, if you want to get to know about Kept, please go look at this tutorial that's been created by, let's say, Ravi and Tal or Vish, something like that. So that.
So if you go into the Nephew Project Docs repository,
okay,
there's a couple issues I created there, and I think issue number 1 is exactly this onboarding material, and this came out of the workshop.
Oh, cool,
right?
cool. So you're thinking about it.
There's we're thinking about it, but there's no action. Like there's no material there. There's just, here's some ideas of things we could do. I think what ideally I would want to do. Maybe we're diverting a little bit. Anyway, go take a look at that.
Okay.
I totally agree. It's necessary. We haven't managed to do it yet.
Yeah.
But that's actually a huge area that people could contribute in, so that we can help grow the community. Like if you're not like, I'm not ready to contribute code directly or whatever directly right now, it could be, I'm going to spend, you know, a couple days learning about this, and then I'm going to go and write a tutorial and use the workshop VM to record a 10-minute video, you know, and have an associated document or deck that people can go through, and associated exercises people can do. Like that would be hugely valuable.
Yes, I think that is how we can actually build a community and contributors willing to, like, you know, spend their time. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Wim, I jumped in, and Wim might have wanted to say something about this too, but also then.
Yeah, Ravi's. Let's Ravi first. I'll wait.
Yeah, sure. No, I was just trying to kind of add a little stretch for the point that Vish made. I mean, as you build out these teams, if you could kind of identify the requisites and basically the time commitments. So basically, you need to be kind of an advanced Go programmer. For me, Go is like, I'm just trying to understand and read the code, but I understand the system. So in that, probably I can contribute in some way, but not develop the operators and controllers and so on. And so if you can identify that, I think it'll be easy for people to choose a team and kind of sign up for based on, you know, how much of time taken effort.
maybe what we should do based on that and what Fish is saying is each of these teams should take under their purview creating some of these tutorials. And actually what we can do is people who want to get involved but don't have the prerequisites yet, they can work with the leader or the other people on the teams to develop those prerequisites and then to document that as a tutorial. Like that's the best way. Like it's kind of what Arvind did with that he spent a bunch of time to figure out how all this stuff was working and then documented, and by having fresh eyes on it, like when I say something or Wim says something or other people that have been closely involved in this say something, they may have more context. The word might mean something different than it means to somebody hearing it for the first time. And it's really challenging. That makes communication really challenging. So I think that's super helpful to have fresh eyes that are, even if they're not 100% fresh, but they're fresh to that particular area. So maybe we do that. We take that under the.
Sure. I mean, if you can identify that, even documentation, and basically identify what are the gaps which requires documentation. And basically, as you said, it requires different levels of expertise.
Right.
So and sometimes it's like you need to go deep dive and engage that one person who understands it and kind of make sure that the content itself is intelligent enough for others to consume, right? So yeah, so I think if you could even identify that, definitely I could help. Hopefully, based on the topics and so on.
Yeah. Okay. Let's let me. I have to grab a pen. Go ahead, Ganesh.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to bring a couple of points. I think based on the comment that Vish has raised today, I think 2 weeks ago when we started these working group collecting the survey results, I think I had similar question. I think you also suggested a couple of topics and also suggested to go through the workshop. I think after I just went through the script and then Porsche, the entire workshop and the entire workflow, everything started making sense. So I think that was a really good starting point. And also, second point is like I've also read the various components of Refio. I think in this document that you're showing, it would be good if you also add the impact that would have on various components and also the various technologies we might also be touching into, right? Like because in some of the components there were some elements where there was development needed inside Porsche. However, in some of them it was mostly about CRDs and modeling. So I think in each of these points it would also be good to point out on which component it would belong and also what technology is needed. So that would be it would help all people to decide on which working group which topic they want to choose. And then third point I wanted to address is this user interface like CLI and GUI. So based on this kept and Porsche and package orchestrator commands, it's very generic. However, when we are trying to manage a life cycle of a network function, it doesn't coincide with any standard like ETSI. For ETSI, we have specific life cycles, right? Like instantiation, onboarding, termination, upgrade. So I think the CLI and GUI can align with the ETSI standards of lifecycle management of network function, so that our Nefio CLI and GUI can be more telco specific rather than like in addition to generic Porsche and KPT way of handling. So these are some 3 pointers I just wanted to add.
Yeah, no,
to hear.
that's so we reused the UI that was available and just made minor tweaks to it for the workshop. So the idea would be that Nefio, that this group, whoever's owning the UI, would make a decision. Do we base what we're doing on that? Do we throw it away and start over? Do we come up with our whole own framework? It's really completely up to that group. R1, we probably don't have, unless there's like, a bunch of people interested in it, willing to give a bunch of time, who have experience building UIs. We're probably not going to get there in R1 beyond what we have, and maybe be able to make a few tweaks to what we have to make it fit with R1. But that said, Nefio itself should have its own UI. And that's completely open right now as to how that gets delivered and what that looks like.
Okay.
Thank you. Bish?
Okay. So I wanted to bring up 2 points. I don't know if Ballard brought this up earlier about asking for additional information, like about additional skills that people have. But at least I was thinking that are we at the point of time where we can ask folks, hey, how comfortable are you, one, in general with Kubernetes? What is your level of experience with Kubernetes? In addition to adding to my earlier point, what do you know about, in general, about Open API and CRDs? And things like, how familiar are you with,
I think what
I don't want to assume.
Yeah. Well, the approach I'm thinking there is actually to take what was suggested just now, and now that we've sort of decided, I think I'm not hearing any disagreements about the 3 groups for SIG automation. So if those are our 3 groups, we need to decide who's going to lead each of those groups, and we'll document here are the expected technical skills, background knowledge, etc. that will be utilized heavily, and then we'll let people self-sort. I think that's going to be easier than trying to survey. And then once people have self-sorted, the team, those smaller teams will be like, okay, so how you self-sorted here? What are your skills? What can we rely on you for, as far as time, as far as skills, etc., etc. I think that's the approach I'm thinking.
Yeah, because for me, like my thinking in my general thinking was like, I felt that, oh well, man, not knowing kept is probably what is crippling me from actually making some significant progress, or in following some of those things about package right now. Oh, sorry, that was my phone. And for others, it's probably like, now we are introducing something new, like package invariants and all this stuff, which I probably did not see in the KEP tutorial. Maybe, maybe it's something new.
It's new. It's brand new. I mean, it's stuff.
Okay.
So config management is part of the platform, right? It's part of the solution, and it's its whole own field, like network management. It's complicated, and there's alternative offerings and whatever, right? So we all brush up against these things, and if we self-sort into where we have interest and expertise, I think that's most useful.
Yeah, my thinking was like, oh yeah, I've done Go programming since 2018, 19, and 20, and then maybe I didn't do it since then. Oh, I know a little bit of operators, but I haven't actually created an operator deployment. Hey, but I would be interested in definitely reviewing the code. So I don't know what the structure.
Potentially, yeah.
I don't know what, when you actually are breaking this into teams, whether this team is the one responsible for, I know I'm thinking there will be some sort of enhancement proposal doc that will be put in GitHub, which means even if you are in a different team, you can still go review that and you can provide your comments, right? Even if they do a PR, maybe you will not be the core committer for that, but you can still go review and you can probably
anybody can review anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Ben. You want to say something?
Yeah, so I see these are all very good points, Vij, but we have to make a little bit of progress, I think. And I do understand that not everybody's on the same knowledge, but what I probably have to do, I don't know. I mean, one suggestion would be is that between John, myself, and Steven, and maybe Tal, we actually divide ourselves into these groups. Whether we lead that or not, I don't know. I have enough to lead, but if we believe that that's the way to kickstart it, we will kickstart it with the goal to basically get another leader during the journey. But what I would do, so here is my theory of what would happen during one of these teams, right? So first of all, we need to form the team. Right? So the question is, how do we do that? We could say, okay, we could appoint a leader, and then we have a set of people to say, okay, that's the main scope of that team, that we say, okay, who wants to be team A, B, and C, right? And we basically divide and conquer a little bit. So that doesn't mean yet that you cannot be involved in the discussion, but you probably are not going to contribute to the other groups, okay? And so what I would do is the following.
Pause you there,
so what I would do is, sorry.
Sorry, I just want to say, and when we establish those teams, to the points that were just brought up, before people self-sort, we'll say, here are the skills needed, here's the scope of this team.
Yes.
And
And I
that will
would,
help
yeah,
you
correct.
also.
So, yeah, the scope plus, I would see if I would be involved, I would basically start with a bit education, right? So trying to get everybody themselves onto the level, because I don't expect the first few meetings to basically go and deliver something immediately. So the first thing that we have to do is get enough understanding amongst the people involved to see whether everybody is understanding what we have to deliver, right? So that's for me step number one, right? And that's part of the team, because if we continue to do that in this big audience, we have very few things that we are able to discuss, and we don't make a lot of progress. So my goal would be, okay, let's first level set and try to educate as much as we can, right? So, but of course we have a limited amount of time, so we should limit how much we would do that, and use that information that we gain there to then document. So the idea is we give, but we also take, right? So because we lack some documentation, and then we start building up a plan to say, okay, we need to deliver this controller, we need to do this and that, and try to then identify the people who take ownership, and as a result, we get the ball rolling. That would be, if I would do one of these things, how I would approach it.
Yeah.
And hopefully then we get through that chain somehow.
Yep.
Sorry, I don't know whether it makes sense. But...
Yeah, it did.
Makes sense to me.
You have to start somewhere. Yes.
Yeah, and I think you should also give the opportunity to people to jump the team once they have learned certain bit. You know, they should be able to contribute more at more higher levels and so on.
Yeah, of course. Anne?
I agree with what Vim said, because I mean, this is not a regular job where you're assigned to a team and it's up to you to perform and deliver and get review and all that. So tell me if I'm wrong. I view this as much more flexible. Everybody's here to contribute as well as to learn. So I feel like maybe I'm just impatient, but dive in. Let's dive in, and then we'll adjust and we'll help each other and we'll learn along the way. I mean, for example, I spent at least close to an hour yesterday with Vim to learn on the phone, right? We talk about controller and operators and how things work, blah, blah, blah. So I think let's not worry too much. Let's go. Sorry.
I hear you, Anne. No, and I agree. And to Ravi's point, I think echoing what Anne said, that this is an open source community. Like, nobody's assigning anybody anything. We're volunteering, and some of us, our companies might be telling us you should do this, but it's still, I have no authority over anybody in this, and neither does Wim, and neither does anybody else. We all just, well, maybe some people internal to their companies have authority over other people here, but in general, like, this is, we're going to self-sort into things that are of interest to people and of interest to their companies. We're going to contribute according to what, what makes sense for those each of those individuals, and we're going to try and coordinate that. The job of the leaders isn't so much to tell people what to do as it is to make sure that they've got coverage to get certain things done to deliver something. And if they don't, then, and Kandan, we talked to Kandan about this yesterday, like, if we find, hey, we've got 17 volunteers in team, C, 1 volunteer in team A and 1 in team B, then like maybe we have a problem, right? And we need to talk to the TSC. I mean, they might need to see if companies involved there are willing to kind of jump in and contribute, add contributors or something. But there's nothing any of us can do about it on the spot, because we lead with influence, not authority here. Tal.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a very technical question. Regarding controllers, I think we're standardizing on Go and probably standardizing on Cube Builder. But John, I remember you telling me that there were some discussions in the Kubernetes community about maybe not using Cube Builder, and there might be a better practice these days.
No. That's if you're Daniel Smith, who wrote 60% of the API machinery code, he poo-poos KubeBuilder. But most of us are not that level of depth and knowledge. He's like, just write it from scratch. It's much better. It's like, okay.
That's what I
fine.
do.
And that's great.
Yeah.
And you're welcome to do that. There's nothing to stop anybody from building it however they want. KubeBuilder for most people is a useful on-ramp.
Okay, I do think it could be a good idea to have a unified code base. So we should, but yeah, I'm probably jumping ahead, getting too technical. When we get to the point where we write controllers, we should have that discussion, I think.
Sure.
And do our best to have a unified code base. On that note, this is a SIG number 3 thing, but another technical issue is how we write tests. So in a few days, you're going to see the Google seed code. And we'll see how useful it actually is for the Nephio community. But one thing it has a lot of is a lot of testing, integration tests, and unit tests. We're going to have to decide together how to do that, right? Because also in the Go world, there are a few approaches to testing. That would be a SIG 3 decision. But I guess the point I'm trying to make here is not to make a decision right now for these things, but that we shouldn't really have a free-for-all. It's true that everybody has like different skills and comes from different experiences. But I do hope we try to unify over some best practices that we decide, even if they're temporary.
Fair point. Anne?
Yeah, tell me if I'm wrong, and sorry I joined late. I had a earlier call, personal call I had to deal with. But I like the idea of once we split into team, some by whatever process, or maybe even as we're doing that, we can have 2-3 sessions where we talk about here are the technologies or tools that we need, we think, we agree on. And we're going to have sessions on not deep dive, but like, here's how to use KubeBuilder, here are the links, here are the example, or here's the seed code, here are the tests. We recommend everybody look at it so that it set a level of comfort, right? I mean, for me, I have a lot of time right now because I'm not working, so I can spend most of my day deep diving. But a lot of people here have day jobs. So I think the requests from what I'm hearing is a little bit of level comfort setting, right? It's not so much that people are not technical or not wanting to learn, but more like a little bit of a roadmap setting in terms of skills and tools. Tell me if I'm wrong. I mean, I'm trying to say, I recognize the need from what I've just listened and trying to figure a way to accommodate that without taking a lot of time and without, make people more uncomfortable.
So Anne, I'll answer you. I agree entirely. And I think most of us do. So it's just people contributing and building those help in onboarding things. So I'm definitely trying to do that now. I have 2 environments set up for learning config sync and learning Porch with config sync separately to kind of like build knowledge incrementally. But yeah, absolutely. Anybody who manages to grok an important part and thinks, hey, I can explain this to others. You can create some repository to teach it, and you can record a video that goes through everything. I think those will be excellent materials. And by the way, useful beyond Nephio, right? Anybody who wants to learn these tools would be able to come to us and learn them.
Okay, I will make another plug for my Nephio project docs repository. There's only 3 issues in there, and the first one is Nephio concepts. The second one is Kubernetes and controller concepts. So that's where we can kind of aggregate those discussions, comment on those, add to them. Those are the 2 issues. They're sort of saying, hey, here's things I know of that is a lot of the background people need. And anything in there that you pick off the list and figure out and learn and can communicate to people, build some materials for that. It would be wonderful. Bala?
Yeah, sorry. So again, it's a question for all and also Tal as well. So we have something called operator SDK that will obviously internally uses KubeBuilder to build the controller. So question to Tal, John, and Wim and others who are the experts in the Kubernetes world. Do you think that is something that can be useful? I just put a link to that in the chat.
Yeah, I would say again that we'll decide later, I think, when we actually get to that point. And I think that's definitely a candidate. Just to point out, the operator SDK builds on KubeBuilder with some variations. There are other options you can use. So KubeBuilder builds a scaffolding of code. It generates a bunch of code that you should take and move on with. And internally, it uses a library called the controller runtime. So you could potentially use the controller runtime on your own without using KubeBuilder and just kind of build it from scratch. I take a different approach as well, where I actually have my own tooling that builds. But yeah, well, eventually we'll decide. But absolutely, Operator SDK is a candidate. It has certain advantages, and I think that team that will look at it will have to decide the pros and cons. And
yeah, and there are going to be some, like, there's some things we've talked about that have implications here that we're kind of going maybe off topic. Did we lose somebody in a hand raise? For example, we've talked about, do we separate the APIs, meaning the Go code that represents the APIs, into a separate repository? That's not sort of the default way that KubeBuilder does things. And so if you do that, I'm not sure if the rest of KubeBuilder scaffolding really works very well, but I'm just not sure. It might. So
no, you're right. It actually is not designed that way, but we can start with KubeBuilder and modify it. Again, let's not go into all the details right now.
Yeah,
the point is,
you can start with KubeBuilder. You can start with KubeBuilders and use the make files when you check them in, so you can separate out the API that way. It's like the mechanics are the mechanics we can talk about in a focus group. It's okay.
Yeah.
So first, let me ask: are there any major objections to that division for SIG automation groups into those three categories? We'll clean up the document or put it in GitHub or something that says here's what those areas are, and then we need to figure out whether there's somebody who's a lead of that, or whether, you know, how the decision making happens there. Eventually, those things would trickle down into, I mean, I guess in the Kubernetes structure, we have things called sub-projects that are part of SIGs, and they're what owns the code. This is sort of starting to look the same, where they would own some particular piece of code or component. And that means that you end up with people in what are called owners files that have approver authority. So rather, this is how we distribute. So, you know, it's not all Tim Hawken and Daniel Smith.
We did discuss this before, and the TSC does give us freedom to do that. So that's our structure for now.
Okay.
Do you mind, just for us elderly people, to summarize the three groups again, just so we can all be on the same page?
The three groups that we talked about were one group that's basically all workload cluster stuff. So the operators that live there, the network management of the workload cluster, even the operation of config sync, the git syncing down there would be part of that group. We're not talking infrastructure here, so we're not talking the provisioning of it, but if there are infrastructure needs like node configuration and you need an operator on a node, you know, that would be part of that group. That would be one group. Another group would be the group that deals with post fan out hydration and the boundary between the management cluster and the workload cluster. So that's after a package has been fanned out to be specific to an individual cluster. How do you continue the hydration like we're doing with IPAM? Also, how do you gather the status, potentially both intent realization status and workload health and network function, other network function specific statuses, and associate them back to that entity. So essentially there's some entity in the management cluster that represents the installation of that network function on that cluster. A package revision is part of it, a status is part of it. And then the other group would be the piece that lives before fan out. So the hydration that happens before fan out, as well as probably the fan out controller itself, and the UI. So that's package variant, the way packages are put together, kind of a little bit, the topology controller, if we have one, and then the package variant set pieces, and the UIs around those. Those are the three areas we're talking about. Alexis?
Hey, thanks, John. Thanks for the recap. That's helpful. The question I have is probably not directly related, and I don't want to sidetrack for the first release, but I want to keep this top of mind. I think a lot of the work that we're going to do right now is going to be very coupled to specific technology when it comes to how we're doing mutation validation of object and how we're syncing object from Git to clusters. I'm under the impression that some of these things are going to be even coupled with CRD handling logic. And I was hoping that maybe down the road, we have more cleaner boundaries so we can introduce different technologies where we see fit. So each one adopting Nephio can decide what technology for mutation of object, what technology for syncing object into clusters, but keep the same capabilities that Nephio offers.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. I think there's going to be, the way I see it is, when we're building controllers that are based on package revisions and things like that, then it's going to be challenging to make those controllers able to source that data or manage. We need a way to manage the package during its mutation process or titration process as a Kubernetes resource. And I don't, and so we'll have to see. I think syncing is something you could already pretty much do with other tools, because we don't do much on the sync side. And there could be other ways to plug in or integrate with existing technologies. So yeah, I think that makes, let's continue that discussion. Yeah.
I know. I don't want to sidetrack everything, but I thought that
what I'd love to do, I'm sorry to interrupt. I know Tal, just time short. Tal has brought this up a number of times with me. Like, I think what would be a good idea is for us to meet. We don't need to meet with everybody, unless just maybe have a meeting of those people who are interested, and maybe go through some of, I know Argo is something you're really interested in, or Red Hat's really invested a lot in. Like, let's look at that and how that might fit in. But like, let's make that a separate discussion. I think there's plenty of opportunity for things to all work together. There's also, we've had similar discussions around like where Helm can fit in to try and leverage existing investments, but still get on a path to taking advantage of the newer ideas. So I think those are all important topics.
Okay, thank you. We're absolutely aligned, and I understand everyone has a scope, so I don't want to derail everyone's scope. Yeah. But I'm planting the seed now, because I'm going to come more with these ideas.
Yeah.
And thank you for being open on that, and let's continue the discussion when it's the right time.
Okay, all right, Stephen.
So for the breakdown of the areas, I do want to say that if at the end we decided to use the Google seed code, the seed code mingle the status and the topology controller together.
Okay, well, we'll have to sort that out.
So they're in different area. It's just a single.
Well, there is an aggregation, right? There has to be at some point, right? So we've got this representative of each function on each cluster, but then you want to see it as a whole topology. So there is a connection. There is like an aggregation piece. How, I don't know how the seed code exactly fits those together, but okay.
Yeah. So the seed code takes the topology intent and build out and build a graph basically, and then start monitoring the statuses on the workload clusters.
Right.
So they kind of we kind of mingle that together in the single controller. Although the watcher itself is a library, but then they linked it into
right. So anyway. There might not always be clear which component falls into which group, but we got to start with something. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Pointing it out. I guess we're not gonna have time for Aravin's thing, but Bala.
Yeah. So, thanks for this, John. I just wanted to. I know everybody assumes it. I just want to make it explicit. So all the three groups, even though obviously we'll collaborate during when we work. But one thing that some of the things has to be uniform. For example, what kind of unit testing that we do, what kind of unit testing. For example, one team may say Ginkgo, we want to use Ginkgo, but the other team say something else. So those kind of stuff, I think those will sort itself out, I guess, since we are all going to start with a seed code, I think, which I believe maybe in the uniform situation where in terms of those kind of aspects are concerned of code style.
I think Tal told me he doesn't like the testing framework chosen there. So I don't know that we'll all agree just because of
okay. Okay, so I just want to make sure that all three groups, and maybe also the release groups as well, when we have the discussions in the SIG release, we're all in sync in terms of coding style, technologies, common technologies, things like that.
So here's what maybe I think we should do along those lines, Bala. Like we're having 2 meetings a week of this whole group. Like I would love it if we could get back to 1 meeting a week of the whole group and use the other hour or different hours if the people prefer to have individual meetings of those other groups. And then so we'd use the larger meeting to sort out those kind of issues, and those are the kind of things we would raise, at least in the R1 timeframe. Those are the kind of questions we'd raise. And then maybe as we get to like planning R2 and things like that, then there's a bigger thing. But like that would be my suggestion, is that obviously we do as much async as possible, but when we need a live discussion, we focus the larger meeting on cross sub-project things. And then each sub-project has their own meetings where they can kind of execute on their issues and things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Vish?
Yeah. So what was the technology that Tal didn't want for unit test? Just
I don't know. That's Tal. I haven't really dug into that code at all.
Okay.
It uses gmock, which is kind of a standard mocking library. It's not that I hate it. It's just a very dynamic based library, which kind of in my mind doesn't use the best aspects of Go, which are static typing. So refactoring those tests is extremely painful. I was just dealing with this a lot lately, and my conclusion is it's not great for that reason. But again, I'm not one of those super opinionated engineers. I really think that whatever we decide on together should be fine as long as it's consistent.
Cool. Yeah, I think I've used gmock, I think, for unit tests, basically for OV and Kubernetes that we have used. But I'm opinionated on unit testing and integration testing. We need them because that is how you can actually welcome new developers, and you can actually be
absolutely 100%.
That is very key.
So along those lines, I would ask Stephen, who's here in SIG 3. So integration tests, or not integration tests, but integration test framework falls into SIG 3. Yeah, Tal not super opinionated. That struck me as funny too.
Not super opinionated. Sure.
But I think what he means is he's willing to compromise. So I would ask Stephen about that. Like, I'd be happy to let SIG 3 also, in my opinion, decide on like recommended unit test frameworks and things like that as well, because they might be useful in how they integrate with integration test frameworks or with the way that test jobs are run or whatever. So, any thoughts there, or what are you thinking? In the document, we talk about dividing up SIG 3 as well. We haven't talked about it in this meeting.
We have not, no, and then that's not the meeting.
Less than 2 minutes. Anyway. Give us an answer.
No, I mean, obviously unit test framework. Yeah, it's something that has to be run with Prow, obviously. And
I think they all run.
It should be us. It should be us that actually propose something that can unify the developers to kind of get into the same one, and then we'll make sure that whatever tool chains that we would use for executing that unit test will actually work for us too. So yeah, absolutely.
I think Vish, is your hand stale, or is that
yeah,
the same?
yeah. No, it's not stale. I want to ask one more thing. So these 3 groups that we're talking about, are we going to actually, is it going to be a closed group in Slack, or is it like, hey, I know the groups are there. So I don't think it'll be a closed group, but
Yeah, nothing is closed, right? No,
okay,
nothing.
cool. It's open source. That's it. Okay.
You can be in all 3 groups, Vish. We would love to have you in all.
We would
3
love
groups.
that. And the other 2 or 3 from SIG3. You can be in all of them.
And
Tell me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the decision or commitment we're going to make is really geared toward R1, right? We have more time to change afterward. Right now, I'm just feeling like we need to move. We need to get acceleration going, momentum going. So what I'm trying to say is don't worry too much about what we're committing to. If it doesn't work, we'll change. Right?
this is what we call at Google bias toward action. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Totally agree. Like, let's just start working on stuff and fix it later. If we, I mean, you know, that can be taken too far, of course, but bias toward action is, I think, what we need here. We've talked enough.
Yeah, because it's March, guys, and May is 2 months away.
Yep.
Sorry.
Hey, keep saying it. Okay, I think we're out of time. Sounds like we're okay with the division of labor here. So I'll try to document that somewhere, and probably more in GitHub as opposed to in the document, since now we're sort of proposing an agreement. And we'll I'll send out a PR or whatever for that today or tomorrow.
Yeah, the question, I think the main question open, I think still, John, is how do we get to the leaders, right? It's probably the next big question we have to answer.
Okay, yeah.
Because that will, gets the ball rolling, and then how people want to, how does it work? Yeah, so we have to get the people, let's say, assigned is probably the wrong word, but people interested in A, B, or C, or more interested in A, B, or C is probably the other thing, right? Because they have to get going somehow. The question is, when do we start that whole cycle?
Yeah.
And how?
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll let's sort it out in the P. I'll get the PR as soon as I can, and we'll just have the discussion there.
Sure.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Oh, all right, Anne. If it's quick, we're already
really quickly. If I may nominate, John, Tal, and them and Steven to lead the group initially, because you guys have the most depth of knowledge and understanding. And then through that process, we'll figure out other leads. I know it's a lot of work to put on you guys.
I'm fine with that. So I'll propose that in the PR, and people, if they don't like it, they can comment on it there. And then I'll talk with Wim and Steven and Tal, and we'll figure out who does which thing. I mean, because Steven also is chair for SIG for SIG3, so we'll have to see bandwidth wise. So we'll have that discussion though between the 4 of us, and I'll put it all in the PR. Thank you, Anne. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.